I was 23 when it all happened. At that time, I was studying at university and often led a wild lifestyle. Almost every day was filled with parties and hangouts. Because of this, after a few months of such a life, I started having trouble sleeping. If I used to fall asleep before midnight, now I was going to bed at 3-4 a.m. and waking up at 7 for classes. This made me more aggressive, which my parents didn't like. So they decided to book an appointment with a psychologist. But somehow, they misdialed a number and ended up calling a psychiatric hospital instead. They described my symptoms, and I was told to come the next day. I was horrified.
What the hell? A psychiatric hospital?
But I couldn't cancel because I would have to pay a hefty fine if I tried. I had to go. The next day, an overwhelming fear gripped me. My hands and legs were shaking uncontrollably, and I could barely walk straight. Entering the lobby, I heard the most nonsensical conversations from the mentally ill patients. From the adjacent walls came horrifying screams and moans, and across from me sat a girl, about 20 years old with severe strabismus, talking to herself. Beside her sat either her mother or brother. I was already panicking, but then I had a panic attack at the worst possible moment. It was horrible. I'd experienced such attacks before, where I would start running around the room, screaming, my pulse racing to 140, unable to speak coherently, feeling like I was losing my mind. I rushed into an office, and without asking me any questions, they restrained me and sent me to a ward for the most acute patients. I woke up the next day in a room with bars on the windows, a metal door, and a white bed. The walls were scribbled on and defaced with blood and other substances. In the opposite corner of the room was a bald girl nervously muttering something. Suddenly, a doctor came in and said we could walk outside for 20 minutes under his supervision. I agreed, but the girl ignored him. Walking through the corridor, I saw the horrors of the psychiatric hospital. A terrifying atmosphere, flickering lights, bars on the windows, doctors administering injections on the spot. But the people were the scariest of all. Among them, several types stood out. Vegetables. People who stared at one spot, undressed for no reason, drooled and urinated anywhere. Drunkards who had the DS and saw hallucinations. Drug addicts, no need to explain. Teenagers aged 18-25 who had attempted suicide. Schizophrenics, kept sedated and under constant supervision. I asked the doctor how long I would have to stay there, and he said at least 3 months. I was stunned, to say the least. I realized I had to escape, and immediately. Otherwise, they'd fill me with drugs and I might end up like them. I spent the entire evening thinking of a plan and suddenly came up with one. In the evening, while walking, I found someone's hairpin. I bent down as if stretching, picked it up discreetly, and hid it. Back in my ward, the girl was sedated and I was given a small dose of sleeping medication. I pretended to sleep. It didn't affect me, since I had used it before, so I needed a higher dose. I quietly approached the door and started fiddling with the lock, using the hairpin. After about 15 minutes, I managed to unlock it, thankfully without any additional locks, since we were considered calm patients. Opening the door slightly, I saw only doctors walking the halls and discussing something. I quietly opened the door, slipped out, closed it, and hid behind a cabinet. Silently, I made my way to the central corridor, which had a small lounge area. After waiting 20 more minutes, all the doctors left the area. They all came out of one room, and I noticed that the doctor's room had a window without bars, just a regular window. This was my chance to escape, as there was security at the entrance and outside. I sat for a long time, contemplating what to do, when suddenly I saw a silhouette at the end of the corridor. It was the same girl from my ward. She started screaming loudly and tearing at her face. The remaining doctors and a guard rushed towards her. The doctor's room was in front of me. Now or never, I thought, and dashed into the room. I quickly locked it and looked around. I found a gun. Surprisingly, I used it to break the window and ran outside with it. Someone started banging on the door, and I realized they were going to break it down. Outside, I ran in any direction, as the grounds were huge. Behind the hospital was a large, frightening forest. I had a few seconds and saw a chair. This was my chance. I grabbed the chair, placed it in front of a high stone fence, and took a running jump. as I couldn't jump over it from a standstill. I was ready when I heard the shouts of guards running towards me. Adrenaline pumped through my veins. I ran, jumped. I made it. At the last moment, I shouted, "I'm sane!" and fled into the forest. I hid in the forest for about 40 minutes until I could no longer hear the shouts of people, doctors, and guards. I decided to get out of there. After walking another 300 meters, I reached a road. The hospital was about 1-2 km behind me. Phew, that was close, I thought, when suddenly I saw that same bald girl running towards me with a knife. She saw me and started sprinting. I had a few seconds to think. I shot her and killed her. After that, I just walked wherever my feet took me until I saw a town. Luckily, it was summer, so I wasn't cold in just pants and a t-shirt. A few days later, I was back home, and this incident was mentioned on TV for a long time. Luckily, I'm alive and well now. And please don't confuse a psychologist with a psychiatrist.